Tina Johnson with USCAN. We will be getting started with our panelists. We'll be hearing from the faith community today. We have the Right Reverend Moore Andrus, who's the Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of California, Reverend Jenny Phillips with the United Methodist Church, Imaad Khan with the Texas Interfaith Center for Public Policy, Yaira Robinson with the Coalition on the Environment and Jewish Life.
Good morning. I'm Mark Andrus, the Episcopal Bishop of the Diocese of California. We speak with the awareness that we are within Morocco and the United Nations, and that awareness brings us to our ecumenical and interfaith family of faith. We have durable, vibrant ecumenical and interfaith relationships and commitments for climate action. Our faith bodies are locally grounded and global in scope. Our faith bodies have long-standing advocacy efforts in climate action, and these will continue in the light of the United States presidential election. From the Episcopal Church, my faith community, let me say that I come to COP22 from the Standing Rock Reservation in North Dakota. The presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, the Most Reverend Michael Bruce Curley, has called the work of the Lakota water protectors in opposing the Dakota Access Pipeline the new Selma. Selma was a signal moment in the United States civil rights movement of the 1960s. Also, the Episcopal Church has for decades taken advocacy stands with the Gwich'in people in the Arctic Circle against the drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and that advocacy will continue. The Paris Agreement envisions a significant amount of the necessary work of carbon reduction being done by subnational groups, largely conceived of as regions and cities. I invite us to think of these subnational groups as including religious bodies. The official youth delegation here at COP22 had developed a presidential to-do list in anticipation of the election in the United States on November the 8th. At the youth delegation action here in Marrakesh yesterday, the words presidential to-do list had been changed to people's to-do list. I suggest we have a faith people's to-do list, and that includes continue to press the United States to honor the Paris Agreement, view faith bodies as subnational entities and activate and coordinate those bodies for climate change, and work to shift the spiritual basis of our cultures away from overconsumption, extraction-based economies that rely on objectification of people and of the earth, and move to economies of harmony and interdependence, manifesting what the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King wrote over 50 years ago. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all, indirectly. Strangely enough, he concludes, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. You can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Reverend Jenny Phillips, and I'm a pastor in the United Methodist Church. I'm here today with the church's Social and Policy Justice Agency, the General Board of Church and Society, as well as Green Faith, an interfaith environmental organization. We are still absorbing the implications of the U.S. election in our work to build a more just and peaceful world. The implications for women, for children, for people of color, people who are struggling on the margins of society, and those living in poverty in the U.S. and around the world. We can't know how the U.S. presidential election and the election of our new Congress will change policy just yet. But there are some things that we do know won't change. First, the first thing that won't change is this: the climate crisis is real. Regardless of U.S. politics, climate change will continue to impact the lives of families and communities with whom our church is in ministry every day. From small farming communities in Africa to indigenous communities in the southern Philippines. Our church is in ministry with people on the front lines of the climate crisis. That work, those relationships, are what shape and inform our church's response. The climate crisis, we know, is a moral crisis, and therefore it demands a moral response. The second thing that hasn't changed is this. Our church's strong, clear voice will keep on rising up alongside those communities. Just this year at our global conference, our church affirmed strong new positions in support of climate action. More important, our bishops, our pastors, our laity on the ground are giving life to those words, raising their voices and putting their faith into action for climate justice, for indigenous communities, and for a healthy and hope-filled future. Our hope remains strong because it is rooted in our faith, but also because it's nurtured by our relationships. And the third thing that hasn't changed is this. The global momentum and movement that has been building for our churches and our church institutions to take action, that movement is unstoppable. Our churches are taking concrete steps to ensure that our facilities, our finances, and our faithful advocacy model climate justice around the world. This is the Action COP, and we are here today to celebrate the ways in which we as churches and as faith communities are an integral part of the people's climate movement. This is a movement that's been built from the ground up. Our relationships, our partnerships, indeed our movement, isn't dependent on any one country's leader, and certainly it's not dependent on any one election. There is much that we don't know about what the future holds, but the world can trust that the people of the United Methodist Church will continue to offer ourselves as partners with elected officials who share our vision, as advocates lifting up the stories of frontline communities, as faithful resistors to any effort to turn back the clock or deny climate change, or any efforts to delay actions necessary to protect God's people and God's planet. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Imaad Khan. I represent the Texas Interfaith Center for Public Policy and Texas Interfaith Power and Light. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. I want to focus my remarks on the difference between rhetoric and reality. I would assert that we should not yield to the temptation to let political rhetoric or past performance define the progress and innovation that are possible in the future. And I say this as a Texan. In Texas, as in much of the rest of the world, rhetoric challenging climate science and doubting human interference in the climate is rampant. Not coincidentally, Texas's fossil fuel industry is one of the most prolific in the country. Texas has historically set the bar as the #1 producer of carbon emissions in the United States. If Texas were its own country, it would be the 7th highest emitter of carbon dioxide in the world. It released about 641 million metric tons of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere in 2013. But despite this abundant rhetoric and history of prolific carbon production, Texas is also home to one of the largest centers of renewable energy in the country. Texas leads the nation in wind power generation capacity, more than 16,000 megawatts. In 2014, Texas generated over 39 million megawatt hours of electricity from wind energy. In 2015, almost 12% of Texas energy generation in the electric utility region covering most of our state was wind power. Texas ranks #1 in the nation for wind energy capacity and biodiesel production. If Texas were a country, it would rank #6 globally for installed wind energy capacity. That's higher than our 7th place rank for carbon emissions. And Texas ranks #2 nationally for employment in the renewable energy industry. So in our state, renewable energy is not just sustaining the planet, it's also sustaining families and communities economically. In fact, Georgetown, Texas, a small conservative city, recently converted to 100% solar energy, not because of environmental reasons, but because it made sense economically. And the faith community has been at the forefront of this renewable energy movement in Texas. Texas Interfaith Power and Light has been advocating for renewables for more than a decade. We helped to defeat a proposed expansion of coal-fired power plants in 2007, and we played a critical role in advancing our state's renewable portfolio standard. Today, Texas faith communities are working harder than ever to ensure that the voices of impacted communities are front and center in the discussion about climate solutions. Texas is home to some of the worst climate disasters in the United States. It's critically important that rural communities, inner-city communities, impoverished cities along the border are connected to civil society and faith leaders in the broader climate movement. For these vulnerable communities, local congregations are often a primary convener and are working all over our state to resource and connect local congregations. The faith community has and will continue to assert that the voices of the most vulnerable to the effects of climate change must also be central in shaping our climate solutions. As a Muslim, I am part of a rapidly growing religious cohort in Texas, and my faith tradition is practiced by almost 1/6 of the global population. Muslim-majority countries are disproportionately affected by the extreme weather resulting from climate change, and Muslim leaders are playing an increasing role in the climate movement. This past year, Muslim leaders issued the Islamic Declaration on Global Climate Change, urging countries around the world to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and calling on Muslims from every walk of life to take action to make our planet safer for generations to come. For it is indeed within the Muslim faith tradition, as it is within almost all faith traditions, the call to action to preserve our planet. As God says in the Quran, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَالسَّمَاءَ رَفَعَهَا وَوَضَعَ الْمِيزَانَ أَلَّا تَطْغَوْا فِي الْمِيزَانِ وَأَقِيمُوا الْوَزْنَ بِالْقِسْطِ وَلَا تُخْسِرُوا الْمِيزَانَ. And he raised the heavens and imposed a balance, that you not transgress within the balance. So establish weight and justice, and do not create deficiency in the balance.
Good afternoon. My name is Yaira Robinson. I'm here representing COJL, the Coalition on the Environment and Jewish Life. COJL deepens and broadens the American Jewish community's commitment to stewardship and protection of the earth through outreach, activism, and Jewish learning. American Jews stand with other religious communities in advocating for a swift and just transition to clean, renewable energy, because we recognize that climate change is a threat that won't wait. We stand with other religious communities in calling for the United States and other developed countries who are most responsible for climate change to help developing countries who are least responsible for climate change, but who will feel the worst impacts, both mitigate and adapt through meaningful funding and assistance. Strong action on climate now is a religious, civic, and human imperative. We stand with other religious communities in dedicating ourselves to acting on climate, and we expect our political leaders to do the same. Equally important in making our local and regional communities more resilient is strengthening our connections to one another. In this time of global warming, we must build bridges of understanding, mutual concern, and shared action. We are all in this together, and the only way to create a just and equitable future for ourselves, our children, and our grandchildren is together. We must get to know other people in our communities, find ways to work together, share our joys, our frustrations, our sorrows, help each other. This work, too, is climate action. Many communities are breaking right now in places all around the world, forcing people to leave their homes in search of food, water, or basic safety. The Migration Policy Institute estimates that in 2015, more than 51 million people worldwide were forcibly displaced as refugees, asylum seekers, or internally displaced persons. Forced migration is obviously difficult for the people and families who have to leave their homes and flee, and it is also difficult for the communities who receive these migrants. The Hebrew Bible tells us 36 times to welcome the stranger. That's more than any other commandment. Why? Because welcoming the stranger is not easy, but that's what we're supposed to do. Jews have too often experienced broken dreams, lost lives, and fractured community. We know that climate change will cause more stress, suffering, and migration. And already today, we see too many people all around the world experiencing loss and brokenness, too many having to leave home and seek welcome in foreign lands. Where there is brokenness, we are called to mend. This is tikkun olam, connecting, healing, mending. As Jews, we dedicate ourselves to building climate resilience in our local communities, to advocating for strong action on climate mitigation and adaptation at the state, regional, and national levels, and to being responsible global citizens through strong support for the Paris Agreement.
Thank you. We're going to open it up for questions now. There will not be a follow-up, so I can make sure I get to everyone, and if we have time, I'll come back if you have a follow-up question. Okay? Please say your name and organization.
Ah, come on.
Well, no questions are being asked. I thought I might ask one as an observer from the University of Reading in the United Kingdom. I just want to ask, whilst you've all mentioned the US election result, how are you going to motivate those who have been discouraged by the election as leaders in your faith?
I can jump in. You know, when I woke up to the results yesterday, I'll confess I felt discouraged because I do so much work in relationship with the environment, with women, with people living on the margins. But I had to remind myself that my identity lies not only in my identity as a U.S. citizen, but also in my identity as a person of faith, and the knowledge that we already have the infrastructure in place to provide words of encouragement and hope and life for people who are struggling, who are discouraged. We are that voice in people's lives, regardless of who is in political leadership.
Yeah, I love the question. I think it might be a question that's applicable to people everywhere in the globe because we are interconnected. One of the things that we brought to COP, this group from the Episcopal Church, is a public understanding that spiritual values underlie our climate work. So we have a little daily meditation and prayer service in the Green Zone, and we look at the values this year of courage, sorrow, honesty, and interbeing. And yesterday we gathered for the first of these worship and prayer and meditation services, and the value was courage. And you said discouraged, and courage literally means to act from the heart, couragerie. And so we're going to hold up these spiritual values and say that all of our acting is based on spiritual realities and spiritual values. Moving to happiness and courage may not be the very best first thing. Sorrow is one of the ones I mentioned, and properly acknowledging our sorrow is an important step in moving forward.
There's a sense in which trying to figure out how to respond to the challenges of climate change feels like being lost in a strange wood. There's a Hasidic story about two people who find themselves lost in the woods separately. One person enters the woods and sees another person in the woods and says, can you help me get out of here? How do I get out of here? And the first person says, you know what? I'm not sure, but I can share with you the ways that don't work. And then together, let's find the way.
Okay, we have a question here, gentleman in the purple shirt, third row back.
Thank you. I recognize the power of interfaith commitment in helping install the values that are needed for the changes we need to make for climate. I'm wondering, because I really don't know, has the new president expressed any commitment to having any faith or any spiritual inclination himself? Or is this the first president who has ever said, I don't have any faith? I just don't know. I'm really interested.
I believe he's indicated a relationship with the Presbyterian Church.
Question here, gentleman in the plaid.
My name's Joe Ware. I'm with Christian Aid. Following on from that question, my understanding was that he has been described in some evangelical circles as a baby Christian. I think he attests to a kind of a more recent conversion to Christianity, and he received the support of some evangelical leaders. And I just wonder if you maybe feel there is scope for either yourselves or others in your, certainly the Christian communities, to reach out to evangelical environmentalists and potentially see if there's any way of communicating the Christian and biblical basis for action on creation care, or whether that might be one route to some sort of advocacy platform.
Great point. I can attest to the fact that Interfaith Power and Light and Green Faith and I myself have been in excellent relationships with evangelical leaders who have been long time actually supporters of climate action. It has a history.
Okay, if there are no more questions, I'm going to close out this session. Thank you all for coming. Thank our panelists for participating, and have a great day.
Thank you, Tina.